The signal. It began with the signal. Dr. Elena Varga hunched over her console in the cramped control room of the Artemis, the deep space research vessel she'd called home for nearly 2 years. The flickering blue-green readout on her terminal pulsed erratically, an unmistakable deviation from the ambient radio chatter of the uncharted star system. She squinted at the waveform as it shifted and danced, forming patterns too precise to be natural. It wasn't random cosmic noise. It was deliberate. "Elena, what do you have?" Captain Idris, Kane's voice was gravelly, his broad shoulders barely clearing the bulkhead as he stepped into the room. The faint hum of the ship's engines reverberated beneath his words. She tapped a few keys, isolating the frequency. A signal. Repeating intervals, modulated patterns, structured. Someone or something is broadcasting. Her voice was measured, but her mind raced. After endless months of scanning barren starfields, this was something alive. "Source?" Kane asked, leaning over her shoulder. "Here?" She brought up a holographic overlay of the system. A small moon, barely a pinprick orbiting a gas giant, glowed red. Localized to that orbit. But the strength, it's as if it's aimed right at us. "That moon?" Kane frowned. "No known colonies or survey data." "Exactly," Elena replied. "Which means this is either a first contact scenario or a trap," Kane finished. His tone darkened. "We don't know what's out there, and I don't like coincidences. I'll remind you we're scientists, not mercenaries." Elena's sharp retort lingered in the air before she turned back to the console. "This could be the most significant discovery in human history, and it could get us all killed," Kane countered. "We proceed with caution." An hour later, the Artemis entered orbit around the moon. The surface was a jagged, ice-slick wasteland, riddled with deep crevasses and towering crystalline spires. The signal grew stronger as they approached, now resonating through the ship's comm systems like an otherworldly melody. Kane assembled a landing party, including Elena and 2 security officers. The shuttle touched down near the coordinates of the signal source, a flat expanse surrounded by towering cliffs. The air was thin and frigid, forcing them into pressurized suits. "What the hell is that?" muttered Corporal Juno, one of the security officers, as she pointed to the horizon. A massive structure loomed ahead, half buried in ice. Its surface gleamed like obsidian, etched with flowing patterns that pulsed faintly with an inner light. It was unlike anything Elena had ever seen, alien, but not chaotic. Every line and curve suggested purpose. "It's a construct," she breathed. "Not natural." "Stay sharp," Kane ordered. He drew his sidearm, his eyes scanning the surrounding cliffs. "We don't know who built it, or if they're still here." They approached the structure cautiously. As they neared, the signal intensified, vibrating through their helmets. The air shimmered near an opening at the base, a doorway, its edges humming faintly. Elena stopped, her gloved hand hovering inches from the threshold. "The energy readings are off the scale. This is advanced technology. Can you determine if it's safe?" Kane asked. "No guarantees." She glanced at him, her excitement tempered by his wary gaze. "But if they wanted to harm us, they could have done so already. This is an invitation." Kane hesitated. Finally, he nodded. "We go in?" "Juno, cover our flank. No one moves alone." Inside, the temperature rose, and the walls glowed with a faint golden hue. The architecture was fluid, almost organic, yet meticulously engineered. The corridors led to a vast chamber at the heart of the structure. In the center stood a pedestal, hovering inches above the ground, emanating a soft light. Elena stepped forward, drawn by the gentle hum of the artifact. Her suit sensors picked up faint electromagnetic activity, but nothing harmful. She reached out, hesitating only a moment before her fingers brushed its surface. The hum stopped. The signal ceased. And then the room came alive. Light erupted from the walls, forming intricate glyphs and symbols that swirled through the air. The pedestal pulsed beneath her hand, and a figure emerged from the light. Tall, humanoid, but not human. Its translucent form shimmered, its features indistinct yet undeniably intelligent. Its eyes, or what passed for them, locked onto Elena. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. It's communicating. Back up, Varga. Kane ordered, his weapon raised. The security team flanked him, their movements tense. No, Elena said sharply, turning to face him. This is it. This is contact. The being tilted its head, as if studying them. Its form shifted, and suddenly its voice filled the chamber, a low, resonant tone that bypassed their translators. Words were unnecessary. Meaning flowed directly into their minds. Why have you come? The question was direct, and Elena felt the weight of it pressing against her thoughts. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but steady. We're explorers. Scientists. We mean no harm. The being's form flickered, and its gaze swept over the group. Your kind reaches far, consumes much. What will you take from here? Elena hesitated, sensing the mistrust behind the words. We don't want to take anything. Only to learn. Kane stepped forward, his tone firm. If we've intruded, we'll leave. But we need to know if you're a threat to our people. The being's form shifted again, its light dimming. Threat lies in the hands of those who seek. A sudden, sharp sound echoed through the chamber, metallic, grating. Juno spun toward the source, her rifle raised. Something's moving outside. The being turned, its glow intensifying. You bring others. Not all speak as you do. Before anyone could respond, the ground shook. A second figure, darker and more imposing, materialized from the shadows of the chamber. Its form was jagged, its presence suffused with hostility. The first being stepped between it and the humans, its light flaring in a protective gesture. Kane's grip tightened on his weapon. What the hell is going on? The first being's voice resonated once more. The divide remains. Your presence accelerates it. Elena's mind raced. What divide? Between who? But before an answer came, the second figure lunged. The chamber erupted in chaos, blinding light, concussive force, and a deafening roar. Kane grabbed Elena, pulling her back as the security team opened fire. The first being held its ground, shielding them with a shimmering barrier as the darker figure attacked. We need to get out of here, Kane shouted, dragging Elena toward the exit. But we need to understand, she protested, her eyes locked on the glowing figure. Not at the cost of our lives. Kane barked. The being turned to them one last time, its voice cutting through the din. You must choose. Knowledge or survival. The choice was made for them as the chamber began to collapse. Kane hauled Elena into the corridor, Juno and the other officer covering their retreat. The last thing Elena saw before the doors slammed shut was the light of the first being, holding back the darkness. Back on the shuttle, breathless and shaken, Kane slammed a fist on the console. Whatever that was, it's not over. Elena stared out the viewport at the alien structure, now silent and still. No, she murmured. It's just the beginning. The Keeper of Shadows. A low whistle cut through the quiet of the forest as Ava coaxed her mare up the narrow trail. The canopy above was dense, sunlight filtering through in jagged slashes of gold. To her left, the ravine yawned wide, its depths swallowed in mist. She adjusted the satchel at her hip and patted the mare's neck. Almost there, girl, she murmured, though the words felt more for herself than the animal. Behind her, the rustle of leaves signaled the approach of another rider. Ava didn't need to turn to know it was Corin. His presence carried a weight, a subtle charge in the air. He always seemed slightly out of place, his sharp-edged demeanor at odds with the softness of the world around them. Still think this is worth the risk, he called, his voice low but carrying. Ava glanced over her shoulder. Corin's dark cloak billowed as his horse climbed the incline, the emblem of the Shadow Wardens barely visible against the fabric. His expression was neutral, but his eyes, pale as winter frost, were sharp, watching her as though trying to decipher a puzzle she hadn't yet shared. She shrugged. The risk is the only part I'm sure of, he snorted, but his lips twitched in what might have been a smile. That's what I thought. The trail crested, and the forest opened into a clearing. At its center stood a crumbling stone tower, wrapped in vines and draped in shadows that seemed too thick for midday. It exuded a presence, one that sent a shiver down Ava's spine despite the warmth of the sun on her shoulders. "This is it," she said, dismounting. Corin followed, his boots crunching on the dry grass. "You're sure it's still here?" "It doesn't leave," she replied, striding toward the tower. "That's the problem." The interior smelled of damp stone and decay. Ava lit a lantern from her satchel, the flame flickering nervously against the walls. The glyphs carved into the stone glimmered faintly in its light, their meaning lost to time. Corin lingered at the threshold. Most people would see a cursed tower and think, maybe not. Ava shot him a look. "Good thing we're not most people." His answering grin was sharp. "Speak for yourself." The air grew heavier the deeper they ventured, pressing against Ava's chest like an unseen weight. When they reached the heart of the tower, the shadows coalesced, forming a dense pool in the center of the room. It pulsed faintly, a heartbeat out of sync with the world. "This is it," Ava said, her voice barely above a whisper. Corin frowned. "It's smaller than I expected." "It's not about size." Ava knelt, pulling a silver chain from her satchel. The pendant at its center glowed faintly as she held it over the shadows. "It's about containment." The shadows recoiled as the pendant descended, retreating like a living thing. Ava's hand trembled as she worked, her lips moving in a chant she'd memorized but barely understood. Corin watched, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. "What happens if this doesn't work?" Ava didn't answer. She couldn't. Her focus was entirely on the shadows, which writhed and surged, fighting against the pendant's pull. Then, without warning, the room exploded in darkness. Ava staggered back, her lantern extinguished, the pendant ripped from her grasp. The shadows rose, taking form. A humanoid figure, tall and impossibly thin, its edges flickering like smoke. "Who dares disturb me?" The voice was a rasp, ancient and jagged, cutting through the air like broken glass. Ava scrambled to her feet, her pulse hammering. "We're here to bind you," she said, forcing steel into her voice. The shadow figure tilted its head, as though amused. "Bind me? Foolish child. You don't even understand what I am." Corin stepped forward, his blade gleaming as he drew it. "We understand enough." The shadow laughed, a hollow, echoing sound. "Do you? Then tell me, Warden, what will you do when you learn the truth?" Before Corin could respond, the figure surged toward Ava, stopping inches from her face. Its presence was suffocating, a tide of cold that seeped into her bones. "You are marked," it hissed. "Do you even know what that means?" Ava's throat tightened, but she refused a step back. "I know enough to finish this." The shadow's laughter rang again, but this time it carried an undercurrent of something darker. Anticipation. "You think binding me will solve your problems?" it said. "Foolish girl. You don't need to fear me. You need to fear what I will leave behind." The word struck something deep within her, a seed of doubt that threatened to take root. Corin lunged, his blade slicing through the figure, but the shadow barely flinched. It turned, its form shifting like smoke, and knocked him back with a sweep of its arm. Ava's instincts took over. She grabbed the pendant from where it had fallen, the chain glowing brighter as her hand closed around it. The glyphs on the walls flared to life, their light searing through the darkness. The shadow recoiled, its form unraveling. "You cannot hold me forever," it snarled. "Forever isn't the point," Ava said, her voice steady now. With a final surge of light, the shadows collapsed into the pendant, the room falling silent. Ava sagged, her knees hitting the cold stone floor. Corin was at her side in an instant, pulling her to her feet. "You all right?" She nodded, though her legs felt like water. Her hand closed around the pendant, now cool and inert. Corin frowned, his gaze shifting to the glyphs. "That felt too easy." Ava didn't answer immediately. She could still hear the shadow's voice in her mind, its parting words echoing in a way that made her skin crawl. "What will it leave behind?" she murmured almost to herself. Corin's eyes narrowed. What did it mean by that? She shook her head. "I don't know." But she did. Somewhere deep down, she knew the shadow wasn't truly gone. It had left something behind, something she couldn't yet see, and she feared it was tied to her. A shattered sky, The sky fractured in hues of crimson and gray, its shards reflecting the chaos below. Earth had endured, but barely. Cities were now skeletal remains, monuments to resilience amid a long and grinding war against the alien legion. Yet here, at the edge of the contested wastelands, the real fight was only beginning. Lieutenant Eris Dovak crouched low behind the wreckage of a toppled skyscraper, his pulse rifle humming faintly in his hands. His squad, what remained of it, flanked him in silence. To his right, Sergeant Maya Torres adjusted the scope of her plasma sniper, her dark eyes sharp and calculating. To his left, Private Samir Cho fiddled nervously with a makeshift grenade, his trembling hands betraying his youth. Behind them, hulking Captain Juno Kale stood like a statue, her cybernetic arm glowing faintly in the dim light. "The hive is less than a kilometer out," Juno said, her voice low but steady. "Recon reports suggest they're massing for another strike. This might be our only shot at taking out their command node." Eris nodded, though the weight of the mission pressed heavy on his chest. They were a four-person team against a horde that had razed entire continents. But humanity had learned to make do with scraps, to adapt, to fight with every ounce of ingenuity and willpower they could muster. "Torres," Eris whispered, "see anything ahead?" Maya's fingers danced over her scope as she scanned the ruins. 2 sentinels, 10 meters north. Armor's thick, but their sensors are slow. We could take them down quietly. "Cho!" Eris turned to the younger soldier, who froze under his gaze. "You ready?" Samir swallowed hard but nodded, clutching his grenade tightly. "Why, yeah, I'm good." Eris gave him a faint smile. "Good. Stick close to Juno and watch her back. We move on my mark." The squad moved like shadows, silent and precise. The sentinels, towering, insectoid machines with limbs bristling with weapons, stood guard in the rubble, their heads swiveling in slow, mechanical arcs. Maya dropped the first with a shot that hissed through the air and buried itself between its glowing eyes. The second sentinel turned, but Eris was already on it, his blade humming as it sliced through its exposed joint. The machine crumpled with a metallic groan. "Clear," Eris said, gesturing for the team to move forward. They advanced through the ruins, the hive's pulsating glow growing brighter with each step. The alien structure loomed ahead, a twisted amalgamation of organic and mechanical design, its spires reaching hungrily toward the fractured sky. The air grew thick, buzzing with the faint hum of the Legion's hive mind. "Stop!" Juno's voice cut through the tension, her enhanced arm raised in warning. Eris froze, his eyes scanning the area. At first he saw nothing, then, in the shadows ahead, movement. Dozens of Legion drones, their sleek bodies blending seamlessly with the rubble. They moved in unison, their every step choreographed by the hive mind. "Ambush," Maya muttered, her rifle already trained on the nearest drone. Eris clenched his jaw. "No way around them. We'll have to punch through." "We're outnumbered 10-1, Samir whispered, panic creeping into his voice. "We can't. We don't have a choice," Juno said, her tone firm. She flexed her cybernetic arm, the weaponized plating shifting into a cannon. "Stick to the plan. Destroy the node, and the hive falls." "On my signal," Eris said, raising his rifle. His heart thundered in his chest, but he forced himself to focus. "Now!" The squad erupted into action. Maya's sniper shots pierced through the air with deadly precision, each one finding its mark. Juno charged forward, her cannon unleashing bursts of plasma that tore through the drones like a scythe. Eris moved with lethal efficiency, his rifle spitting fire as he covered the flanks. Samir hesitated, his grenade clutched tightly. The swarm was closing in, their shrieks piercing the air. He took a deep breath, then hurled the explosive into the mass of drones. The blast sent a wave of heat and shrapnel through the battlefield, buying the team precious seconds. "Good throw!" Juno shouted, grabbing Samir and pulling him back as more drones surged forward. They fought like cornered animals, each second a desperate struggle for survival. But slowly, they pushed through, the glowing hive drawing closer with every step. "We're close!" Eris yelled over the chaos. "Torres, take point. Find us an entry." Maya nodded, her movements swift and purposeful as she led the team toward the hive. The structure loomed above them, its surface writhing as if alive. A narrow breach in the side offered their only way in. "Inside," Eris ordered, covering the rear as the squad slipped through the opening. The interior of the hive was a nightmarish labyrinth of pulsating walls and glowing veins. The air was thick with a nauseating scent, and the hive mind's hum grew louder, drilling into their skulls. "This way," Juno said, her cybernetic arm glowing brighter as it synced with her tactical scanner. "The node's up ahead." They moved quickly, their weapons raised. The passage widened into a chamber, and there it stood, the command node. A massive, crystalline structure pulsating with energy, its surface etched with alien symbols. "We hit that, and it's over," Eris said, his voice tight with determination. "Torres, set up. Juno, cover her. Cho with me." As Maya prepared her sniper, the hive mind reacted. Drones poured into the chamber, their shrieks deafening. "Hold them off!" Eris shouted, firing into the swarm. Juno unleashed a barrage from her cannon, her mechanical arm glowing white-hot. Maya's sniper shots echoed like thunder, each one carving a path through the chaos. Samir fought beside Eris, his fear replaced by a fierce determination. The drones came in waves, relentless and unending. Eris knew they couldn't hold out much longer. Torres now yelled. Maya took a deep breath, her fingers steady on the trigger. She fired, the shot slicing through the air and burying itself in the node. The crystalline structure shuddered, its glow intensifying until it exploded in a blinding flash. The drones froze, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Then, one by one, they collapsed, their connection to the hive severed. The team stood in stunned silence, the chamber eerily quiet. "We did it," Samir whispered, his voice trembling with relief. Eris nodded, his body heavy with exhaustion. "Let's get out of here." As they emerged from the hive, the fractured sky seemed a little brighter. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in years, humanity had struck a decisive blow. And Eris knew, deep in his heart, that they would endure.